Amazing. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to give it just 1 minute, and I promise you literally just 1 minute, and then we're going to jump into everything that we have prepared for you all today. But as we do that, thank you again for being with us this morning or this afternoon, depending where you are. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. I'm super excited for today. I think for a lot of times some of these webinars I think can be pretty fluffy and not really things that you can leave with and actually apply to your business. And today I actually think we have an opportunity to present to you really hardened, valuable insights about the challenges your team and likely you are facing as you start to think about how to really apply AI into your business. And so our goal is to give you a clear playbook on some of the challenges that you're probably either faced or about to face as you go through those conversations inside of your business and start to plan your AI strategy or try to scale or advance your AI strategy. Just by way of introduction, I'm Josh. I'm the general manager of Ask AI. I've spent the last 7 years in the AI space, all focused on customer experience and support and how to really bring AI into the enterprise. And what's been uniquely different for me during my time at Ask AI is the core focus in the B2B space. Prior to this, I spent about 4 years in primarily a B2C environment, right? Very high volumes of tickets, not very complex. AI was a great fit. And as you step into the B2B arena, it's just so different. And so, we've learned so much about this community and this audience, and it's really, a very different beast with a different set of problems to solve. And so, I brought Tina along with us today. Tina leads our value consulting organization, and it's, I think, a special moment for us to share with you what we've been working on. Because a year ago, we decided to make an investment in value consulting, and the reason for this was that we saw what was happening in the market, which was everyone we talked to in the B2B space was failing with AI. They were all trying and they were doing what I would call expensive experiments, months, quarters, sometimes half a year, trying to launch a very simple AI use case and failing. And what they were finding was either two things were true. One is that the tech wasn't ready for them to actually meet their goals, or two, or the idea of their goals, or two is they had no way to actually track the value of these programs and to think about what actual value for their business would be when you remove this idea that just like maybe we're going to deflect everything, right? So this is the goal for today. And so, Tina, if you can take me forward one slide, please. What we'd like to do is sort of start with at the top level, just what we're seeing in the space around how B2B teams are approaching AI today. And then Tina is going to take you into a step by step on around how we've been working with B2B support organizations to really understand their workflows, to be able to see what are the actual actions that their support engineers are taking on a repetitive day-to-day basis, and really where the bottlenecks are as they try to resolve highly complex cases. And then at the end of the session today, we're going to do a short demo just how we approach the problem. So again, thank you guys for being here, and let's go ahead and dive into it. So maybe to give you a bit of color just about what we've been doing is over the last period of time, we spent a ton of effort building out what we call a shadowing program. And this is an opportunity for us to really partner with our customers and to get in the trenches with them to actually observe how their support engineers work on a daily basis. And so over the last course of time, we've spent hours, weeks, days watching support engineers solve complex cases. We've worked with over 20 organizations to do this. And really what we found is that it's not so much an issue of can these cases be resolved faster? It's actually that most of the time, the leadership in the organization doesn't necessarily see all of the real problems that are happening on a day-to-day basis, on a minute-by-minute basis for their teams. And so uncovering all of these mini issues and all of these true bottlenecks in their process is actually quite complicated. It's actually quite hard, but as you start to pan it out, it's actually quite valuable. If you go forward for me, Tina. And so I think one of the core challenges in this is that, as you all know, AI is everywhere, right? I'm sure in your organizations, there's millions of conversations about AI. Some of you are more advanced than others, but everyone is having this conversation. The unfortunate part, and I think this is particularly true for B2B support, is that there's a bit of a dichotomy because your leadership, the executives in your business are saying we need to deflect cases because that's what they see on LinkedIn or in the news, on Bloomberg, right? Here's how we can deflect 80% of the support cases in your business. And you, as a practitioner, know that that's probably not actually true. So the conversation starts in an odd way. But when we think about the life cycle of a case, all the way from when it gets created through to how you use that for your day-to-day strategy or to inform your support and product relationship, there are so many application areas for AI where you can actually drive more value. If you can go forward. And the reason that this might actually work, if you start to think about sort of the life cycle of a case in a more interesting way, is that B2B support is just inherently hard. And B2B support is just inherently hard. It's a complex environment. You're serving enterprise customers. You're likely serving multiple go-to-market motions, and you have a multi-stakeholder account management reality inside of your business that you need to support. And then layer on top of that that our tech stacks are absolutely insane, right? There isn't a single source of truth. There isn't just a knowledge base that we can rely on. And most of the time, our business is really operating in very clear silos, right? Sales is supporting our customers out of Salesforce on one side of the world, and CS is operating out of Gainsight, and we're in Zendesk. So this source of truth about what the customer actually needs or what the real reality for a customer is spread all the way across, a large number of systems. And really, to drive resolution for meaningful cases, you need to be able to aggregate all of this information into an effective way that actually drives impact for the business. And most companies that we talk to are stumbling at this place, which I actually look at as the sort of the first part of your AI strategy, which is how do we actually collect this knowledge and create a unified knowledge base that can be applied across all the aspects of our support journeys or our customer journeys. And as we've got into this, I think what we found is that this is making, really meaningful impact on the business. And, your dashboards probably show that we're moving through more cases or we're meeting our SLAs, but everyone knows that there's an opportunity to drive better outcomes inside of support. And in my view, yeah, there is, a lot that's happening where we see, hey, this simple AI use case can really start to, shave off days from mean time to resolution. We can take out a large amount of escalations into tier 2 or into engineering. But more and more, what I'm convinced by as I start to look at the sort of application area across the entire support journey is that there's actually an opportunity for support to move from a very reactive state where your general measure of success is how many tickets do we close per day per engineer, how fast are we, to one that is much more proactive, where the measure of success is really how impactful support is at driving great customer outcomes. And so that's the nature of this conversation. I'm going to turn it over to Tina now to walk into how this shadowing process works and give you more in-depth learnings.
Thanks, Josh, and thanks for the intro. And super excited to chat about the work that we've been doing here. We've been super excited as a team and really building out the shadowing program to really understand what our customers are doing. And this did come to be about a year ago when I joined the company and we were trying to understand what support was doing, where we could drive the most amount of efficiencies, and really how we could understand the business in that B2B lens. So as a company, we spent a whole bunch of time sitting with our customers as well as our prospects, and we were really trying to understand how they were working. And what I was personally trying to uncover was with each of these sessions, the first thing that I was trying to uncover was that to begin with, how are these companies and how are these agents working through a ticket and why are they having such a hard time doing it? And then the second thing that we were uncovering after that was they had so many tabs open. So the question was, why do they have so many tabs open? And then the third was, how could they possibly remember what they're working on when they already have 4 chats going at once? And honestly, when I started and when we started going through these sessions, I felt dizzy and they were walking me through each step and we were trying to follow along, but each step forward took us a few steps back. But as a company, when we would complete all these shadowing sessions, we'd try to take a step back and really try to think about it critically. And the one thing that really stood out for all of us was that support agents were not operating a system. They were actually just trying to survive an ecosystem of tickets. And this ecosystem of tickets and tech really doesn't simplify over time, as you've heard from Josh. It actually just compounds in complexity. And the ecosystem actually gets messier which, with every quarter, with every year, with every new product, and with every new acquisition. We were just talking to a company last week, and they were talking about how they've gone through a bunch of acquisitions and they're bringing over new taxonomies that they know will never fully merge into their product. And there's also probably certain behaviors that the KB hasn't caught up with, or they're going into a migration where they have hybrid states for certain customers. And obviously, there's no documentation that exists for that specific issue. And every customer ends up running their own unique reality. So agents don't really work from a single system of truth. They work across six partial ones. So with that same customer, they were going from Zendesk for intake of the ticket. Then they remembered that someone posted about a similar ticket on Slack earlier that morning. So they were going to the SME channel to pull the relevant context. And then they remembered that actually there might have been a Jira bug that was reported a few days ago. So then they went to Jira for the engineering source of truth. And they realized that they actually had to go back into the logs and work in the customer's environment to actually mimic their behavior to then understand how to go through those steps. But they realized that they didn't have the information they needed. So they went back into the internal KB and tried to piece together all that information. And really, here's the part that a lot of support leaders don't want to admit. And agents are just multitasking because they have no other source. They have no other source of truth. And they're not multitasking because they don't have a system that is able to give them that truth on every ticket that they work on. And if we think about search, that doesn't help either. It actually fractures the truth and brings it further from reality. And we can think about it with that customer. The KBs from 3 versions ago were being pulled up to solve for a bug that was reported 2 weeks ago, or Jira tickets that looked similar but actually weren't even relevant, or answers that were written confidently from another agent but were actually pertaining to a different product line. And at scale, search becomes noise. So agents just stop trusting it. And honestly, I would stop trusting it too. And they themselves have to become the search engine. And imagine if we layer in chatbots, and if they enter the picture, things get even more complex. What we think is automation and what many leaders think is automation from the outside actually becomes even more hidden labor. And that's because usually these chatbots miss the context from the customer question, or they build answers on wrong assumptions, or they gather super lengthy responses that then have to get pushed to human agents who have to rewrite, review, and really understand the summary and context of the customer inquiry. And we watched agents reattach these child and parent tickets just to really understand the context of the entire ticket. And they would reopen cases because one field was mislabeled, or go to the drop down to figure out what else they could categorize it by. And then they were going to Jira to escalate something that wasn't actually a fix. And after all of these hours of shadowing, the observation was really obvious for us as a team. And it wasn't that support was slow because of the work. It was support was becoming slow because every ticket was coming from a fragmented truth. And one wrong label just multiplied that chaos instantly. Which brings us to figuring out what actually is going on. So, in B2B support, the bottleneck is not the resolution time. It may look like it, but what we see is simply that the agents need to do about 100 clicks and have 14 tabs open in order to fully understand the context of the ticket that they're working on, and really to understand what they need to do and where they need to start. And the hardest part, what we observed, was actually just understanding what that very first step is going to be. And before any command is run, before any customer environment is pulled in, and before any sort of template or macro is inserted in the customer response, we believe the investigation is already compromised. And that's because you're probably pulling the log from the wrong version. You're going into the wrong environment, or you're searching and pulling results from a completely different product line. And if we bring those chatbots back into the picture, their outputs might sound right, but they're actually rooted in assumptions that are initially wrong. And by the time an agent already starts troubleshooting, I have talked a lot about the different steps that they take. They're actually just rebuilding the story of the system that should be giving them that source of truth. So a single wrong tag doesn't really slow that investigation. It actually replaces it completely. So what that means is that agents end up doing the work twice. They do it once down the wrong path, and then they have to rewind it and do it again. And troubleshooting rarely fails because the fix is really hard or it's super technical. Of course, we have those examples as well. But what we believe is that troubleshooting fails because the definition was wrong from the very start. Which brings us to what we observed from an aggregate level. So let me show you what this actually looks like. So usually we'll book a call with our customers or with our prospects, and we'll sit down with them for 45 minutes and really try to understand how they're going through a case. And it'll look something like this. As you can see, there's multiple steps. There's a lot of investigation that goes on. There's a lot of screenshots, a lot of different sources where information is being pulled. And there's a lot of rework that happens at this case. And then either there's an escalation or the case gets resolved. But as you can see, there's so many steps that need to be taken in order for a case to be solved. And truthfully, about 80% of this is search alone. So now you can imagine how these Figmas got super complicated and overwhelming as we started working on them. And what we were really just trying to pinpoint is where specifically in that workflow that I just showed you, we could drive the biggest impact and drive the largest ROI. And what we realized was that across all of these different shadowing sessions, across all of these different companies, so companies spanning from a few product lines to over 50 product lines, was that there was four common themes, and we saw it in nearly every single session. And the first started off with tier one being the interpreters, not necessarily the troubleshooters. We would even call them the triage. So tickets enter their system, they're usually incomplete, they're vague, or they contradict each other. And the agent would go in, they'd search, but search wouldn't be able to reconcile the differences across the different versions or the different environments. So what tier one would end up doing was just spending time guessing the true intent of the ticket. Naturally, they wouldn't get a response or the appropriate source of information to get back to the customer. So they just escalate it to tier two. Then tier two would re-diagnose the problem that most likely already exists somewhere. We also see tier two as the SMEs. So the real fix already existed somewhere. It was probably distributed across a Slack thread, or it was brought up in a stand-up meeting earlier that day, or there was a Jira bug that someone knew about, but it was actually just linked under the wrong product line. Or maybe someone remembered that that certain customer had a parent ticket or child ticket that was attached to it, but was actually just mislabeled 2 years ago. And what we saw was that support wasn't really lacking that knowledge or the content. What support was actually lacking was retrieving that specific source of knowledge. And then that fed into tickets not being able to evolve and to be reusable for knowledge or future training or future onboarding. And search obviously can't see those patterns because the system itself can't see those patterns. And then it brought us to the last point where documentation obviously exists, but the discovery fails. And discovery fails because all of those different steps that need to happen, but it also fails because the team can't produce content. And no system can align to its modules, its versions, its real world deployments, its multiple problem tickets, or just the reality that there's so many tiers that are working through such a large volume of tickets that the last thing they want to do when they wrap up their day is create a KB article. And if they do, the KB becomes a graveyard of what is well-intended documentation, but very rarely used because it's so inaccessible. And then most support leaders would intend that a chatbot would reduce all of that or all of those problems. And what we often saw was that they would return cases that actually needed even more cleanup and more repair. And in reality, they were just escalating noise, and that's all it was. And we saw this as not necessarily an inefficiency or an accident or that the agents were doing the wrong thing, but these were all the structural outcomes of having that fragmented truth system, which honestly has a bigger consequence on the business than most assume. So, one wrong assumption at the start can wreck the entire ticket. Josh did talk about the ticket life cycle, and that was definitely our biggest takeaway from the shadowing itself. We'll dive into that really soon, but specifically on this point, when intake itself, so when we think about the ticket from the very first point, the entire ticket life cycle would take the intake wrong, meaning that the entire life cycle would inherit the mistake. And if they would inherit the mistake, then that would multiply. So I spent some time a few weeks ago watching an agent go through a very lengthy process. Now you can imagine the agent came in, they were unsure of what to label the problem ticket as. They weren't sure what product it fell into. And once they assumed what it was supposed to be, it entered the wrong queue. So once it was in the wrong queue, the tier two was pulling the wrong logs. If they were pulling the wrong logs, then the wrong problem was diagnosed. And you can see how this could trickle in all the way to the top. And eventually we got to a JIRA ticket, which led into a long, lengthy JIRA backlog. And we know with backlog, there comes SLA risk. And with that SLA risk becomes even bigger churn risk. So this wasn't a hypothetical chain reaction. We actually watched this unfold across hundreds of tickets every time we did this. And you can imagine the context switching would magnify that damage. It's not only taking those steps, it's also going from Zendesk or Salesforce to Jira to Slack to Confluence to the customer's environment and then back to the ticket. And every jump forced the agent to rebuild that mental model from scratch, meaning they had to remember every step that was taken from each pass and each turn. And that is the unavoidable truth that support wasn't slow because the fix was super complicated or difficult or hard to find. It was slow. It was slow because the starting point was wrong once the ticket entered its life cycle. Now, AI only works when it understands how support actually works. And this is how we've been challenging that question with our shadowing sessions. And what we see is that most AI is built to answer questions, and that's great. There's a lot of great providers in the space that are able to do that. But for B2B support, it usually fails due to the missing answers. And support fails because the system doesn't understand the ticket. And we're not here to tell you that, AI is bad or we know it all, but I really want you to challenge yourself to think about support and the day-to-day role of an agent from a very simple perspective. So that's what we were trying to do as well. And that simple perspective allowed us to focus on the right areas of AI impact. And what we saw as the real impact was actually just starting off with identifying the product, inferring the version of the product, understanding the troubleshooting steps that need to happen in order to solve that case, and then any sort of recommended next steps or escalations or any other follow-up that needed to happen from there. Or the other option, which is to determine if there is no solution and that you need to escalate to a more specialized team. And really, AI must collapse all these different systems into one flow. So it needs to be able to follow the structure of either triage to intake to resolution to wrap up to knowledge to reuse, or from resolution to intake to triage, depending on the structure of the company. And that's because knowledge doesn't live in a static document. And we definitely know that. It actually lives inside the ticket lifecycle, which is super interesting. So across all of the hours of shadowing, one thing that really got me excited was this ticket life cycle. And it wasn't just knowing when the agent was going to go to another tab or when we were going to get an Ask AI gotcha. It was actually that the ticket and every single agent that worked on that single ticket actually contributed to so much more than just an interaction. It actually had its own life cycle, meaning that the ticket was created and worked on and then solved for, and then became like a golden ticket or a problem ticket that was used on future cases or for new hires or for training or for the quick ramp of a new tier two. And what we could also see in all of those sessions was that AI was deployed at the wrong end of the life cycle. So Josh touched on this a bit in the beginning, but companies assume that friction lives at the bottom. They think or they see slow handle times in their dashboards, long searches, or delayed resolutions. So they buy something that's bottom of funnel to help solve that case, such as chatbots or a new knowledge manager or an initiative to create new macros and templates or additional training. But really sitting beside those agents, we saw something else. And that was that at intake, AI could assume that the ticket is correct. Yet this is actually where 70% of the errors would happen. So imagine if that ticket then goes into triage. In a hypothetical sense, with this AI tool, and I'm not saying that this is what we do here at Ask AI, but if there's a wrong assumption, AI would then move the ticket faster with the wrong information. And it would make bad assumptions and really amplify them. Then it could eventually bring it to the escalation where it would actually move the ticket faster. But that's not necessarily smarter because then engineering sees the broken context or the lack of notes or the lack of follow up that's needed to really investigate the ticket. So that context gets broken there as well. Then at resolution, you could have a chat bot that generates a really polished answer, but the agent actually has to rewrite that answer because the foundation and the true issue in the ticket is actually wrong. And then imagine to the point when it gets to knowledge. If you misdiagnose the ticket, that misdiagnosed truth becomes a KB article or a ticket that's referenced in the future. And then that misguides the customer even further. And what we see is that AI is being used to really optimize those outputs, but it's in a system where the error lives at the input. So no matter what sort of solution you were to implement in a system like this, you would see those errors. And it wouldn't reduce any effort for the agents either, because you were just making even more complexity into the ticket life cycle. So everything actually gets easier when the ticket starts in that right place. So when intake becomes accurate, we can stabilize the entire search and agent case resolution process. And actually, what we see is that agents stop chasing those missing attachments. They stop repulling irrelevant information. They stop escalating and creating JIRA tickets that obviously should never become JIRA tickets. And they stop stitching parent and child tickets just to rebuild context for the next agent. And they also, which is my favorite, is stop jumping between systems every 30 seconds just to confirm that what they're putting on the ticket is accurate. Because now they have the truth that is really consistent. And as a result, search becomes reliable because the data at its source is reliable. And then the knowledge compounds and the life cycle becomes clean again. So we really think that you can't fix support and B2B support with Band-Aid solutions. And what we really want to challenge is a system that's able to change the whole flow of the ticket. So support inherits complexity from every corner of the business. We've seen it through shadowing, through those acquisitions, through migrations, through outdated KBs. There's really no amount of search or search tuning that can solve this. And there's no macro library or template or chatbot that can fix the core issue of this problem. And that's because they're not content problems, they're actually system problems. So downstream efficiency really requires upstream clarity, and then downstream clarity requires upstream truth. And we've actually seen that with a lot of our customers. So when we actually go in and try to deploy our suite of agents to our customers, we really try to understand where we can maximize the agent throughput, impact all these metrics that are on the screen and really create a better experience, not only for the human agents, but for the customers as well. And at Rapid7, the breakthrough didn't really happen when AI began answering questions. We saw the breakthrough really happen when the system was able to start understanding the case and the context of the case. And that was actually happening before anyone even touched the ticket. And once the platform surfaced the correct product line, the right troubleshooting steps, and correlating the right tickets and known issues, we actually saw triage accelerate. And then diagnostic time dropped, and then context switching also dropped, and escalations naturally fell as the byproduct. And this wasn't a story about writing the best answers and the most polished responses. It was actually because we were starting to understand where we need to assist and where we assist in the right place. And then we saw it across some other organizations as well. We worked with a customer that supports dozens of product lines, and they're constantly acquiring new companies and bringing these products to their frontline support teams with minimal training and honestly not enough time for training. And each of these come with their own life cycle debt and parent tickets and complexity and different environments. And of course, mislabels are common, and routing was also unstable in the sense that things were being escalated that wasn't supposed to be. And then search was also unreliable because you were pulling irrelevant tickets. And once we changed that, and once we made sure that we were understanding the ticket from the first part of the ticket lifecycle, we saw search become a lot more consistent. And then being able to generate the next steps that were recommended was also becoming a lot more efficient. And naturally, escalations dropped. And we also saw patterns emerging for the first time. We were understanding how to fine tune the agent and how to challenge the output and really harden the troubleshooting steps that the human agent needs to take. So even in the most complex support org, like that example I shared, things were starting to become predictable. And that's because we were finally having ticket lifecycle clarity. Now, most orgs assume that MTTR reflects resolution time. I mean, by definition, it definitely does. But in B2B support, up to 80% of that metric happens before troubleshooting even begins. So think back on my Figma, the multiple steps an agent needs to take. There's about 80% of that we could condense in understanding the problem and then understanding where to begin solving the ticket once it actually comes into the queue. And a lot of these support leaders think that multiple steps and a lot of search and eventually a good MTTR doesn't really, impact the bigger picture on an agent level, but it actually does because the cost isn't in the fix. The cost is everything that's actually required before the fix can even begin. And support doesn't lose time on that fix. It actually loses time every time that context breaks. So we saw it with the multi-step systems and the different handoffs and all the escalations. And you can imagine context is breaking at every handoff and at every touch point. So there's missing details, there's contradiction between Jira or the KB, or you're pulling irrelevant versions of the product line. But by the time that ticket gets to the senior engineer, they're not actually diagnosing it. They're just trying to reconstruct it and everything that happened before it got into their queue. And that deepest source of delay isn't the complexity of the ticket and the complexity of the product line. It's just that context is lost. And actually, that context that is lost is very expensive for the organization. Now, the fastest way to improve this in your support organization is to really reduce that mental gymnastics. And what I mean by that is that low value work and rework is the unbudgeted cost center in absolutely every support organization. And we've seen it. We've gone through the questions of what product is that? What version is that? What logs matter? Who escalated that in the Slack channel? And all of these questions just create low value inputs. And if we remove that cognitive burden, we automatically see a productivity jump, and it's rather immediate. And as a result, agents are handling much more cases per day. They're also getting promoted. They're doing their job a lot more efficiently, and everyone can see the positive impact on your day-to-day workload, but also from a metric perspective as well. Now, support handles thousands of cases per month, and I'm sure your organization is the same. But in theory, every one of them should strengthen that system, and by that I mean every single ticket. But without accurate intake, search can't learn, and as a result, patterns can't emerge for the support leaders, and then also knowledge can't evolve, and that life cycle just resets and repeats every morning if no action is taken. And when knowledge is created actually inside that life cycle, so understanding that ticket life cycle and where all these different steps need to happen, you're actually tying it to better data. So search becomes more reliable, training is a lot more efficient, and you get through it a lot quicker. And obviously, escalations fall, and then throughput increases as well. And then this transformation is taken from effort to actual ticket intelligence. And now the question we see very commonly on LinkedIn and various other sources is that a lot of people are saying that AI is going to replace your team, but we're not here to talk about that. And AI won't replace your team. It will actually finally let them do their jobs. And teams don't need AI to replace them. They need AI to actually remove that low effort work that has a very negative impact to performance. So if we could even fix 20% of that life cycle, we know that the remaining 80% will become a lot more predictable, a lot faster, and a lot more scalable for your entire organization. Because really understanding where AI can help your team makes a true material impact to the business. And it's much more important than just buying AI to quote unquote make things, more efficient. And that's why we stress the importance of really understanding the ticket life cycle and really understanding how your team works today. So I'll challenge you all to take this question away and think about what are your agents doing when they log in and are opening up their very first case for the day? Where did they start? Where did they spend most of their time? And how are they really going through the case with all of these different distractions? But if you are having trouble trying to understand how they do that today, then you're welcome to book a shadowing session with us and scan the QR code. And we can also help you uncover where specifically your team is either experiencing the largest bottleneck that has the biggest impact on metrics, and where we can guide you in creating an agent or a workflow that's best designed for your organization. So with that, I'll turn it over to Josh to go through a quick demo of how we do this in action and how we do this today to support our customers.
Amazing. Tina, thank you so much. Maybe if you actually want to just go back one slide, there's a couple questions in the chat for you.
Okay.
So maybe we'll tackle those first, and then we can jump into some of the product stuff. So one of the first questions is just actually about the flow chart that you shared. And asking really like how many similarities, obviously a very complex process. How much similarity did you see across the organizations that you work with?
Yeah, so I would say for about like 80% of the organizations that we've shadowed, they follow a very similar flow. The heaviest part of the workflow is definitely at the intake and at the triage stage where they're trying to uncover the problem and what the next best steps are. I would say that's common across 80% of the customers we shadowed. Of course, some organizations are built very differently. Usually we see the biggest pain point there, and also at the end of the ticket life cycle where obviously agents are working on multiple tickets, so they don't have the time to wrap up their notes and go through all the cases that they worked on that day. So usually that's something that doesn't happen across the board.
Nice. Thank you. Next one was actually about sort of like what happens after this. So the question was when you read this back to the team, obviously, to say, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Support VP, here's what we uncovered. What were like sort of the most surprising takeaways for the leadership?
Well, the first was that they really don't understand that their agents are taking multiple steps to just get through the initial part of the ticket. They're often surprised that escalations are due to the result of not having the right search experience or pulling the relevant information. So they don't realize the negative impact that, lack of searchability, lack of sources, and just a lack of unified search that allows these agents to be a lot more productive. So I would say the biggest takeaway is not understanding that escalations have a much more significant impact, and it's actually a bottleneck that can be removed rather easily.
Great. Okay, last one for you. So we talked, I'll paraphrase this, but we talked a lot today about problem definition. Do you see opportunities as you go through this for leaders or teams to use AI to better uncover what these problems actually are, so they have a better set of visibility using these tools, and especially as they try to scale, I'm assuming their AI programs.
Yeah, absolutely. And the idea here is to take more of a general approach. When we do these shadowing sessions, we're really trying to understand not obviously how Ask AI can help, but also how your organization can operate and work a lot more efficiently. What we document is all the core areas that will drive the biggest amount of efficiency, but then it's down to a discussion with the leaders to understand which ones will actually move the needle and impact metrics. So I would say we spend the time trying to understand the business in order to make this a lot more productive because eventually this becomes the shared roadmap and we can reiterate and refine this process once they actually start using tools that impact those initial bottlenecks that we outlined.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Tina.
Thanks.
Okay, so in the last couple of minutes we have left, I wanted to take you through just a slight walkthrough of how we approach parts of these problems. And so I thought to do that, probably the first thing that would be helpful is just to level set a little bit about how we think about applying technology into the B2B support environment and how the product really aligns to some of the challenges that Tina shared with us today. So the way we think about Ask AI is really as the world's first AI native platform built for B2B support. And we've started really by building a best in breed way to aggregate all of the knowledge that lives in your business, not just knowledge bases, not just tickets, but all of the surface knowledge that is inherent to our businesses that is required to actually provide great customer experiences. We then integrate well into this data. I'll show you how we do that. And we use AI to get it into a pre-processed state where it can be usable for search applications like Tina talked about, but also well beyond that for more insight-driven and analytics type use cases to drive alerting and notifications, to auto-create knowledge, and far more. And so today I really just wanted to focus on sort of the top right corner here and talk about what we call our Assist product and show you how support engineers can really change the way that they work, as well as how easy it is to set up a type of system like this in a very complex environment. So I'm going to go ahead and just jump over into Salesforce. And on the right-hand side here, what you see is the Ask AI assistant. This is a browser-based assistant. It actually is not living inside of Salesforce. It's living directly in my browser, which means that we don't need a Salesforce admin to, change any of the objects or the tiles inside of our agent's view. They don't lose, all of their screen to an AI tool that they only use at some points. They can close, minimize it, resize it. And what you see here when I open it up is what we call an agent run. So here I've pre-run an agent that's designed to help troubleshoot a case. And what this does is it solves some of the core problems that people see even just trying to apply AI to typical search use cases. One of the things that we actually hear surprisingly often is our team maybe asked the wrong question, or we like turned on this AI feature and it's just a blank box and our reps didn't know what to ask to get a good answer. So when you run an Ask AI agent, the first thing that it does is it actually interprets the case to understand what questions are being asked and how I need to prompt the system in order to get a high quality output. So you'll see in this example, it's actually searched through, 5 different variations.
All right, looks like Josh was experiencing some internet issues. I hope he's back now.
Let's see if this does
Okay,
better.
let's try it again.
I apologize, everyone. So we'll jump back into it. So like I said, you can see here the AI run that's generated, and you can see all of the associated knowledge that is attached to that ticket. And what's really nice for agents is now that they can actually dive right into the surface knowledge that was used to actually generate that AI output. So they don't have to leave their screen, jump back to Jira, go to Confluence, go to SharePoint, like Tina sees so often in these shadowing sessions. What I think is important really to highlight from a, sort of making the example of taking these workflows, really getting into the detail and then making them applicable to your business. One of the things that everyone's learning really quickly with AI is that in order for it to be great, not just good, but to really be great, you need a high level of customization, right? And customization comes with two sides of the coin. One, obviously, we want it to be purpose fit for the use case that we're trying to drive. But that also means that there's a lot of work that's typically involved, and not many of us have great AI skills on our team today, at least. And so the way that we've approached this, and this is the back end of Ask AI, where we have what we call an AI agent builder, where we have a number of pre-built AI agents that are specifically built to serve a variety of different use cases across the case or ticket lifecycle, and allow you to make modifications, customizations, or even build new agents to actually make them fit to your business. So in this example, this is the agent that I just ran. There's a variety of different ways that you can trigger this agent. Um, and you can go ahead and you can attach any model directly to this agent. We often help our customers understand what tools are actually best to use when you're thinking about these types of use cases. You can start to apply different tools to the agent. So as an example, this is all of the connected knowledge that Ask AI has understanding to, and we can pick very dedicated sets of filters that will actually power this for us. From there, we can get more complex. We can create sub-agents. We can create actions to actually update case records or to update fields. And then we can actually start to build a high quality reusable prompt that will drive that agent output. And this is where I think a lot of the meat really comes together to make sure that you have the ability to drive a high quality output for your team with low levels of friction and the ability to actually fit it directly into your support workflow on a regular basis. So the last thing that I wanted to show you that's probably not as just bear with me one second. That's probably not as flashy, but is actually the most important part of building these systems is really how the data starts to get integrated into an AI system. And so most of the time, what we're hearing is there's sort of like two things that are happening. One is that for enterprise complex environments, most systems out there really struggle to integrate with these data sources and to do so in a meaningful way. And the second is that if they do have integrations that are available, most of the time they just are sort of a blanket integration, which means pull all the information in and hope for the best, let the AI sort it out. One thing that we're really diligent with is actually thinking about how we configure these integrations to make sure that the right information comes into your AI strategy to drive the output. So as an example, in this, here's where we can configure Service Cloud as a use case or as a data source. We have very, very fine-tuned capabilities to pull the relevant fields directly off of your case object and make sure that really the most important data in the way that you run your business is available in Ask AI and then can be repurposed on a repetitive basis into the agents that I just showed you or into a variety of other different use cases throughout our platform. So hopefully this gives you, good insight into how to get started. A lot of our customers are able to turn on a system like this in a number of days, not months or quarters. And if there's anything that I can comment on or clarify, I'd be happy to answer questions in the chat. Cool. There's one question here that is product specific. So question is your product able to distinguish between support tiers or product specific teams to tailor the information? Really good question. This is very, very common, and I think is one of also the gotchas of of most AI systems. Many of you have multi-product environments or tier-based systems that often have many similarities. Uh, to overcome this, what we have done is really starts with the application that I was just showing you there around how do we actually bring data into the system. So making sure that we understand at the field level the data that's coming in. So being able to understand which cases or which knowledge bases are associated to X product or X tier. And then you can build groups, filters to actually apply outwards to your team or to, let's say, other environments like a customer self-service portal where you only want certified public knowledge to be used in an AI system. Great. Another question in here, just more insight on how quickly you can go live. Um, it's honestly quite quick, and the reason is we've done all of the heavy lifting already. The heaviest, hardest part, the last part of the question in the chat says we've struggled to go live with other AI systems. Most people, when I hear they're struggling, it's failure to launch. They're unable to make the integrations that they need actually work. They spend a lot of time trying to bring those things together and we're able to set up integrations in a matter of hours, really. So most of our customers are able to get a pilot or a proof of concept up and running in under a week, and many go live in under 3 weeks.
Great. Thanks, Josh, for the demo and for taking the time to answer those questions. We'll wrap it up here. It was great having the time to share a little bit about the work that we've been doing here at Ask AI, and we'd love to collaborate. So feel free to scan that QR code again, and we can chat in the near future. Thank you. Bye.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody.